For our audience online, I believe that you have been full of expectations. Coming up is the first speech as introduced by Ms. Java Lam. Our first speech will be conducted by Dr. Yuko Kikuchi, and she's going to share on the topic of towards a sustainable culture of crafts, Kanazawa's regional perspective and the big picture. Let me give you an introduction on Yuko Kikuchi. He has been served at Chelsea College of Art at London University of Arts London, as well as the Train Research Centre for over 25 years. She is now working at the Kanazawa College of Art, and she is a professor of arts and design history. I would like to pass the time now to Dr. Yuko.
Invited to the ICH Plus Summit 2021, which is a timely initiative to gather expertise and experience from across the world to explore the ways in which intangible cultural heritage is to be safeguarded and passed on to future generations. Japan shares the global concern at a national and regional level, given this critical moment when faced with shrinking regions and disappearing traditional crafts and heritage. Craft matters greatly to Japan's national identity and cultural essence, having evolved to a mainstream culture and economic activities, largely as a result of Japonism, otherwise known as Western taste for Japanese things, dating from the late 19th century, and its extension into Eurocentric modernism that has driven Japan since then. When the first British minister to Japan, Sir Rutherford Alcock, proclaimed Japan as a nation of crafts in 1878, adding that it doesn't have any fine art. Japan took this colonial rhetoric at face value and set crafts at the center of the national strategy for strengthening the nation economically and culturally. As a result, craft-making activities in Japan have developed into a uniquely large-scale business that has become embedded with complex political and cultural problems, typified by the historical trajectories of crafts from postmodern, pre-modern to modern, and post-colonial entanglement. We can now identify somewhat rigid vertical factions that are competing among the following four roughly divided institutionalized categories. 1, regional craft industry. 2, traditional crafts, in which its system of intangible national treasure, the highest position of craftsmanship, is positioned. 3, koge, craftical formation, or contemporary art, that is linked with the Japan Fine Arts Exhibition founded in 1907, and 4, craft design, designer-maker products, and revamped modern minge. Each has a vast number of national and regional activities that operate in strict separation, usually for the wrong reasons. The terminologies used to describe materials, techniques, and making processes differ between faction and even regional schools within factions, which block communication at a national level. Moreover, when translated into English, this whole area of production loses its meaning, not only because this complexity ends up being translated in many different ways, but also because it ends up being forced to fit into single English term, crafts, which of course has its own Western baggage. Meanwhile, the problem of overall sustainability across the vast web of craft-making activities and their institutionalized divisions is seeing them collapse amid the rise of creativity around cross-bordering activities. So, how do we address these complicated problems? It is obvious that we don't have a one-size-fits-all solution, and we cannot safeguard all heritage in its unchanged form. What we can do is to think about what, if anything, can or should be changed. What do we safeguard now? And how can we collectively prioritize our actions in this space? One big picture framework from which we can and perhaps should start thinking is the UN's SDGs. As Kate Raworth argued in her Donut Economics, which has become the basis for the SDGs, we have to bring everybody living on the planet into the inner ring of donut for our well-being and happiness. so as we exist between the two critical borders of environmental and social sustainability. In order to do that, a paradigm shift is required in human activity that includes craft production and consumption. The big picture presented by SDGs demand we redefine the idea of progress and growth by refocusing society and community as an embedded relational web of individuals, and by designing the world with ideas that are simultaneously complex, dynamic, and humane. The idea of cultural diversity that promotes safeguarding and inclusivity of multiple culture underpins cross-sections of the SDGs, as shown in the slide, that would impact the economy, society, and the environment. From this perspective, the issue of post-colonial conditions of craft is considered as the core issue of sustainable culture. Contemporary critics such as Glenn Adamson and others, including Paul Greenhalgh, Peter Doma, Akimoto Yuji, and Kaneko Kenji, argue that crafts have been marginalized by fine art due to Anglo-American-centered modernism and the institutionalized art system. In non-Western countries like Japan, this is crucially important because the post-colonial argument for cultural diversity is a major part of the drive for sustainability. They discuss how we can critically reevaluate the field away from the fine art versus craft polar axis, how to release crafts from the rigid discourse of tradition and traditional restricted materials, together with the idea of decoration and function, and how to resituate crafts in a broader visual culture. In the context of these big pictures, I'm going to examine the case of Kanazawa, the UNESCO designated city of crafts and folk art since 2009, to identify elements of support for proposals on how we might select and prioritize actions that move craft forward into a sustainable future. Kanazawa, with its current hyped obsession with crafts, presents an excellent vantage point to explore this global question. Kanazawa, capital of Shiga Prefecture with population of 500,000, is geographically located westwards of Tokyo and northwards of Osaka, Kyoto, and is easily accessible from each by fast train. Tourism, with annual visit numbering 10 million, is critically important for the city's income, and the tourist gaze, in the sense of John Early's idea, is increasingly shaping the cultural discourse of authenticity, which is driving cultural policies. UNESCO's designation, combined with this flourishing tourist industry, has boosted the pride of the city and its people in their regional crafts. And even further recognition recently arrived in the form of new National Crafts Museum that opened last year to house a major part of the craft collection of the Museum of Modern Art, Tokyo. The pride has one very clear source in historical narrative, the story about Maeda clan of the Kaga domain, present Ishikawa Prefecture, from the 16th century, which became one of the wealthiest domains in the country. The key strategy was to strengthen the domain's economy by diplomacy, craft diplomacy, trade, and technology, and underpinning that was the innovative training and knowledge of advanced craft skills attained through cultural missions that were dispatched to different regions of Japan. Over time, these missions compiled a collection called Hyakko Hisho, with over 2,000 miniature samples of craft materials and finished parts, including decorated lacquer, woven fabrics, wood, bamboo, leather, paper, decorative metal nailhead covers, furniture, and door handles, as well as the stages of making, tools and techniques to help develop the domain's craft industry. This historical story of Maeda's craft policy is connected with the current UNESCO status, and the city has selected 22 types of craft to construct a seamless lineage. These include gold leaf, Kanazawa Lacquer, Kaga Yuzen Kimono Dyeing, Kanazawa Kutani Porcelain Ware, Kaga Embroidery, Kanazawa Buddhist Altars, Kaga Inlaying, and Ohiraku Pottery Ware, which came to define official Kanazawa's crafts. Local crafts have been renamed so as they start with Kanazawa or Kaga in order to narrowly define makers and products within the city's taxed area, separating themselves from products of adjacent cities, and in some cases, like in that of Kutani Ware, histories have simply been adjusted to fit the narrative. Therefore, this UNESCO Craft City designation owes its success to political lobbying that resulted in constructing the Kanazawa brand in crafts. It also led to a politicization of crafts and consequences for the city's cultural and economic business prioritization, inevitably resulting in too many conflicting craft politics driven by numerous agencies and interested parties. Nevertheless, Kanazawa City allocated a significant budget to craft-related projects, such as the World Craft Triennale at the 21st Century Museum of Contemporary Art and the Koge Art Fair, which generates craft business and branding. There is also a clear awareness of the challenges that craft faces in the 21st century. The city's strategic plan, Kanazawa Koge Action Plan, published in March 2020, aims to reset the craft strategies on the 10th anniversary of the UNESCO designation, and goes on to describe how the shrinking traditional regional craft industries are due to the receding population and aging society, as well as unstoppable decrease in the number of makers, and a supply chain that has broken. The emphasis is on the support for sustainable and feasible future, shifting away from preservation of traditional regional craft industries as they were, in order to regenerate new activities from what still exists and is currently developing. Supporting the main objectives, which you can see on the slide, the city operates Kanazawa College of Art, where currently the craft department is expanding to strengthen skill-based craft training. The city also runs galleries and outlets within Kanazawa as well as in Tokyo, and supports retaining early career craft makers to set up their own business in Kanazawa, with a view to revitalizing the community and the city's economy. One such example is the Utatsuyama Craft Studios residency and advanced training program, which the city considers a modern-day version of the Maeda clan-sponsored craft training center, Osaikujo. Craft artists in general also receive subsidies of up to 2 million yen, US $20,000, to set up their studios in the city using abundant, unused houses, and can secure support for the use of machiya, historical wooden townhouse with elegant front lattice, typically dwelling places of merchants and craftsmen in pre-modern times, which also supports the city's tourism initiatives. In this way, the city seeks to combat the problem of aging population and dilapidated historical houses through regeneration of crafts. Aside from the UNESCO designation, the city and Ishikawa Prefecture boast 9 holders of the Living National Treasure status out of 58 in the category of craft, which ranks the prefecture second nationally. They are recognized in the field of lacquer, metal casting, inlay, wood turning, ceramic overglazing, and resist dye fabric painting. Designation of the important intangible cultural properties, so-called Living National Treasure System, started in 1955 for traditional skills, waza, in the field of ceramics, dye, and weaving, lacquer, metal, wood and bamboo, and doll making. The Japanese term waza is one of the most respected notions in Japanese culture, recognizing time-honored, historically accumulated collective knowledge. Atsumae Fumio, the Living National Treasure lacquer artist, honored for his gold inlaying lacquer chinkin skills in Wajima, argues traditional material and traditional skills are not changeable, and tradition has to be passed on to the next generation, as it was and has been with no modifications. Therefore, new materials such as artificially made gold powder or new tools and technologies are not acceptable. So the idea of skills that the system protects is fixed with no possibility of evolution. Although this system has been highly talked about and copied by many countries across Asia as a model for preservation of cultural values, after 60 years, we see signs of stagnation and cracks. The confusion around the idea of tradition and past, which are arbitrarily institutionalized, has increased over time and stifles the artistic innovation and creativity that can feed crafts. Factional divisions on the parts of schools of master craftsmen link with regional politics to formalize craft activities and render them closed to outsiders and newcomers. Such are not attractive to new generations of makers. And these factors underpin the lack of interest from the current generation, and we should note that average age of Ishikawa's holders of the living national treasure is 78. At the center of this nationally led initiative, as well as Kanazawa's city policy, is this single word, waza, which is shorthand for cultural coded language pregnated with many values that are ingrained. Indeed, it is not only skills, but also decoration and function, which have been uncritically assigned to craft and its evaluation. Akimoto Yuji proposed the idea to flatten out crafts in the Koge Miraiha exhibition at the 21st Century Museum of Contemporary Art in Kanazawa. The idea was in line with craft critic Kaneko Kenji, who coined the word craftical formation, rather than crafts to look at contemporary craft work as formation of individual subjective expressions determined by the chosen material, the making process, and techniques involved. This is also demonstrated by lacquer artist and exhibitor Yamamura Shinya, who is professor at Kanazawa College of Art and makes use of traditional materials including gold and silver leaves, quail eggs, shells, and different colored lacquer. In his work, Yamamura uses them in a way dissociated from the historical and traditional context as a means for individual expression. A refreshingly progressive idea is found in his approach to tools. He uses a diamond thread that cuts with sufficient sharpness and an imported laser cutter to slice mother of pearl shell rings efficiently. For him, as long as his aesthetic judgment is informed by masterpieces from the 18th century Edo period, new tools and innovative processes of making are welcome. Cultivation of new ways of making and appreciation craft work appear to help in thinking about the overall sustainability from practice of contemporary crafts. Further, radical questioning and reassessment of the meaning of crafts come from the designer makers who use their experience to generate new approaches. Sekka, or Snow Flower, is a team of young designers, alumni of Kanazawa College of Art, who after graduating worked at big-name companies such as Nikon and Victor, and returned to Kanazawa to set up a design company that produces work in collaboration with artisans. Their profound interest in and knowledge of regional crafts and artisans' ways of making is combined with their know-how of making use of high-tech methods as they constantly question and re-question making, and in particular the idea of handmade. They created what they call crafted plastic by first making a hand-carved plastic plate, then digitally tracing it and making a 3D plaster mold in order to generate a metal mold for the production line. For them, the idea of tools and the linked idea of handmaking should be able to evolve as always in history. They pose a challenging question. If an inkjet printer prints out a drawing designed by human hand, can this be regarded as handmaking? Seka also challenges Mingei or regional functional objects. Why does this particular form matter to so many people? Is it sentimental memory and just familiarity? What is the strong drive for retaining this form? Seka designed an acrylic gorokuan called a bone of vessel that has an iconic shape of a wooden soup bowl, gorokuan, a tradition of Wajima lacquer. There are many types of soup bowls, but with this tall foot and widely open large-sized bowl, people identify easily it as Wajima's Mingei Gorokuan. It is codified form and object. Seka designed an acrylic tree with grains that are digitally copied from a 50-year-old tree to make a tree-like material and made it into Gorokuan by means of a 3D printer coated with the red-colored natural lacquer inside the bowl. Again, they pose the question about the relation between natural material and traditional forms through this acrylic lacquer bowl. Many lacquer-coated traditional-looking bowls that are sold under traditional regional lacquer craft brands have plastic bodies because of its cost-effectiveness and the lack of wood-turner artisans. The lacquer for coating in layers is natural, but the decline of the sap growing industry means it is no longer made in Japan, and 95% of lacquer comes from mainland China. Even the living national treasure lacquer craft masters often have to use imported lacquer. Seka seemed to have a point in questioning locality and regional tradition if traditional regional materials are not used. Indeed, to what extent can the icon of tradition be retained if one is changing the materials and the ways of making? Which elements of crafts are those that create value in craft objects? Their experiments towards creation of new craft design offer a range of possibilities as they dismantle the elements of crafts materials, forms, tools, and methods of making, dissecting them and reassembling in new ways, as if creating a grammar for a new language. Through Kanazawa, where crafts are at the center of life, history, politics, and economy, we have looked at how regional problems are dynamically related to the global drivers and seen something of their constant negotiations. I want to suggest in conclusion 4 propositions that emerge from this case study to help navigate towards prioritizing and selecting actions for sustainable future. We now understand not all traditionally developed crafts and the ways that they are produced are sustainable. As we see in Kanazawa's case, the top-down support from both UN's global framework and regional government strategic funding are highly useful in protecting, raising awareness, and supporting consumption through promoting tourism and nurturing new studio craft artists. However, fundamental problems such as scarcity of natural materials, shortage of tools and makers themselves point to the need to find alternative ways. Initiatives have to come from bottom up, from bodies of producers who also have to be aware of the big picture and proactively explore alternative ways, for example, new technological solutions. The requirement includes willingness to be open, to accept change, and to work towards creative innovation. Examples of good practice exist, such as that of Miyayoshi Ceramic Company, which champions the SDG manifesto for its manufacturing process, and Okagaki Yugo of Senshudo in Wajima, who creates lacquer bowls in the 17th SDG colors, has designed an SDG badge and uses part of the profits to replant lacquer trees for his carbon positive project. Meanwhile, the National Living Treasure system has to be put under serious scrutiny as it is becoming an archaic institution that is losing its original vision, especially its narrow understanding of skills without context. As craft theorist Peter Dormer argued, reductionism and atomization of skills create the problem of losing the wholesome way of looking at concept, design, and equally united in craftsmanship that is tacit knowledge centered on skills. Skills should be discussed in an interdisciplinary approach. Connected picture and the selection process of living national treasure should be open to a cross-boundary and cross-disciplinary quality check to avoid skills for skills' sake. Recently, the Creation of Japan, a non-profit body commissioned by the government agency for cultural affairs, promoted a story to illustrate how information exchange is important. The Ministry of Environment had hired a consultant to help solve the problem of helping the near extinct short-tailed albatross on the Ogasawara Islands in the Pacific Islands survive an onslaught from a rare type of black rat, which had flourished where the rat had developed a taste for the brains of the bird. Meanwhile, as had been carefully logged with the Ministry of Education, Culture, Sports, Science, and Technology, this particular type of rat grows the hair that is uniquely used in brushes for makie lacquer, and which May had believed had become exceedingly rare, if not extinct. A chance meeting of a living national treasure of makie lacquer and the environmental consultant made the connection, and a solution to help the continually challenged lacquer industry was found. The story illustrates that in the world of crafts and heritage, information is often contained in a closed system. The problems of crafts that die out due to lack of materials, tools, and succeeding makers are not communicated. This is partly down to internal cultures of sectionalism within ministries and beyond, but also lack of knowledge about the engagement with information technology and the use of social media. There is little desire to seek out solutions on the part of makers and their close-knit organizations, and they typically wait for help provided by an authority. So the need for improved information exchange is not just within government, it rather needs to break down barriers for all parties. While waza or skills-centered education has proved to be one aspect of preservation that has seen success since 1955, and evidence is seen through the regular intake of students in the craft department of art colleges, has not decreased. However, there is a gap in this skill-centric education. Students are not fed the big picture. Critical studies is not part of their curriculum, and they lack critical thinking and about why they make and how it can engage community. The message of the SDGs has not been heard in relation to all aspects of curriculum for making. This problem in undergraduate program continues into the graduate program where the PhD is understood as Doctor of Art, in which students hone their skills without philosophically, socially, and scientifically questioning the whys. Art colleges must be the incubator of alternative and innovative ideas, and strengthening of critical thinking through practice is strongly proposed for assessment of skills and heritage in the big picture. Terminologies used in making and evaluating crafts vary in each region and in different schools of making. They have regional, cultural, and historical connotations attached, often with poetic names that mystify and are only known to the small closed world in which they operate. In order to standardize terminology and improve communication, understanding of material, technique, and quality factors with a view towards connecting up groups and exchanging information nationally and globally, Creation of Japan has started a translation project. Translation here means both translation into contemporary plain language and translation into English. In this ambitious project, they involve makers to decipher these special terminologies by words and demonstration, then undertake cross-cultural examinations and translation. Kanazawa Craft Arts Translation Handbook, Kaga Metal Inlay, is the first outcome published this April. This is an important work to create a platform for networking and exchanging information, but more work, however, is needed. Safeguarding tradition and heritage from the basis of our shared thoughts in the 21st century. But we need to know which part of tradition and heritage are important and why. Critical localism, as Kenneth Frampton argued, is still a valid position to tackle this issue in recognition of the dynamic of local and global engagement. The recent fashion for kintsugi and its metaphor for trying to fix what is fragmented and broken in local communities raises the question of caring for each other as well as cultural heritages. In the tourist's favorite local public gardens, Kenrokuen, one can find a unique and poignant illustration of this principle, with the aging and dying trees being propped up and supported by every means imaginable. However poetic this might seem, old trees like old master craftsmen die sooner or later, and one wonders, what does the future hold after that? Kanazawa's case presents some hints of a push towards creation of a new mode of knowledge, while at the same time persisting with a surge of regressive pull towards the old mode of knowledge. Like a human life, in the cycle of stepping forward and stepping backward, we still need to act with our collective wisdom and cross, connect, and collaborate towards a sustainable culture for post-industrial and post-colonial crafts. Thank you.
多謝晒菊池如子博士，我哋今日
Thank you, Professor Yuko Kikuchi. Today we are very honored to have Mr. Louis Yu, the director of Hong Kong Art School, and Dr. Yuko Kikuchi is also live with us online. Welcome to leave us your questions, audience, both in the venue and online.
In English, so I can communicate with Dr. Kikuchi. Thank you very much, Dr. Kikuchi, for this very inspiring and visionary talk. And I want to ask the first question. I've been to Kanazawa, and your usage of Kanazawa as an example of your vision towards intangible cultural heritage is very unique, because from our point of view, Kanazawa is a very special city with the national and regional policy long-time support into the retaining of the cultural heritage. But in your speech, you mentioned about using this concept of intangible cultural heritage with the UNESCO SDG, Sustainable Development Goal, SDG target, and also the donut economy. It means that it is possible to use the theory and approach of the intangible cultural heritage for other cities too. For example, for Hong Kong as a city with a short history and with a culture of not keeping our history a lot, do you think that with your theory and your approaches, can they be applied to a city like Hong Kong with such a short history and with such a culture of not keeping a lot of our history? Do you think the example of Kanazawa can be applied to many other cities in the world?
Hello, good morning, everyone. And thank you very much for this invitation and having me here today again. Thank you very much for your comment, Mr. Yu. Yes, and I presented a very particular case about Kanazawa because as I said, craft world here is too complicated. and we have to start from something else, something, at least we can connect to. So my proposition was SDGs. And as you, Mr. Yu, also probably think about a lot of things about Hong Kong's particular cases, SDGs is very good things to start with, to connect, because often the crafts world is connected to very small worlds, and they talk about region, they talk about a regional tradition and so on. And that's what they're blocking the communication. So if we start talking about SDGs, we have lots of things we can exchange information, and we can think about the same goals we can address. So yes, definitely, this is something we can apply to various contexts and many cities in the world. And I really would like to, through this my presentation, my intention is to really to exchange the information and connect to people and share and knowledge to find the ideas how we go forward.
Thank you very much. And if, say, members of the audience have a question, you can raise your hand, and our colleague will pass you the microphone. Question?
Yes.
Yeah. Lam Lam.
Yes. Hello, Dr. Kikuchi. When you mentioned about the national treasure, you say that is a system you suggest might need to change. Any suggestions for that? Because if you think about if those masters can pass their knowledge to new generation, isn't it a good idea? Or maybe we can have something to like a conditions. If you are being crowned as a national treasure, you must have the responsibility to pass your special technique to the next generation. Then you can honor it as a national treasure. But anyway, is there any suggestions you recommend?
Thank you very much for a great question. I have enormous respect for this Living National Treasure masters, and also the way they've been really developing their skills and in a very wider meaning of skills. But I am criticizing this system after 1955. It's been quite long, and then 1955, they had a very great vision of thinking about this preserving and then pass on to next generation. But what I'm proposing is we need to review this idea of skills, because it's getting narrower and narrower and narrower. And as I quoted from Peter Dorman and other craft critics, the skills is one of the things we are now, a lot of people in the world, craft critics and other people are talking about. It's a really fundamental human skills, and which has got a much more larger meaning. So we need to redefine and re-examine this idea of skill, which was set at the center of this system. So I'm not really attacking the system, but needs to be reviewed and then making it more contemporary, making it relevance. So that's, I really wanted to deliver this message.
Yes, Connie?
Hello, Dr. Kikuchi. This is Connie. Since you have been spending 10 years in UK for research, I would like to know from your perspective how Europeans or UK practice to preserve heritage is how different from Japan, and what inspirations you get from the UK, and what type of perspective you bring to your UK research also.
Yes, thank you very much, Connie, for that question. That is my constant question every day too. After 30 years, I mean, more than half of my life was spent in UK. So my training and the way of thinking and the problem solving is very much UK approach. And so with my just only 2 years, I've been living in Kanazawa. This is a very interesting, perspective, I guess, as from an outsider, and it's wonderful. A lot of things going on, and very much craft obsessed, people and city and culture here. So this is very unique. I find it's very unique and interesting, but it's so complicated. And then there are so many factions and politically related problems. So with my outsider's view, what it needs is some kind of reorganization of all these complicated and some working, some not working aspect of it. And one thing I can bring in as an educator and working in art college is the critical studies. As I said in my presentation, there are lots of making going on, but there aren't many about thinking about why you're making and why you're using this particular material, why using this particular tools and so on. So this critical studies, I've been really trained in UK, would be quite useful in starting to this, reviewing this whole complicated, very wealthy, craft culture.
Question? Well, I have one question for Dr. Kikuchi. Since we have been talking about UK, and I have read some material about the British people. I mean, the governments they have different opinion about signing the UNESCO Convention of Intangible Cultural Heritage, and there have been controversies and discussion about whether UK should join and sign the Convention of Intangible Cultural Heritage. In your research, did you look into the attitude of the governments towards the Intangible Cultural Heritage Convention by the UNESCO in the context of UK?
Thank you very much for your question. I would like to ask Mr. Yu about this details. I am not very familiar with UK's different attitude toward intangible cultural heritage, but what I can say from my general point of view about UK's interest in crafts, they are having a very different craft culture. I mean, in a simple word, craft culture is not big in the UK. And here in Japan, craft culture is the center. And rather, fine art is a very minor, small field. So this hierarchical thing, which was brought in as a cultural colonization, made these things quite different, hierarchy in visual cultures in general. So I would imagine that their attitude or their interest in intangible cultural heritage is coming from quite a different thing, and from their examples also very different. They don't have living national treasure system, for example. So I would see that whole difference. But again, this is a very big picture. We all have to address is SDGs. So we can start discussions again on the same basis, addressing this SDGs toward 2030 and then renewing these goals, continuing after 2030.
Since we have some more time, do we have more questions?
Hello. Hello. Yes, sorry. Hello, Dr. Kikuchi. As I know, you are working in the university now, Craft University. Back to the questions of the national treasure. Actually, I'm not agree with you, but I kind of, because I'm working in this project that is bringing the master to work with the contemporary artists. That's why I'm raising out the questions. Is there any like a laboratory or a research center similar like that to put them, master and young contemporary artists together to do the research, or they work together to contribute in the art educations?
Thank you very much for your question. As the the situation is very complicated, that's what I start my presentation as 4 subcategories and subcategories of crafts. And these all factions and then the whole institutionalizations are all established differently. So when I emphasize the cross-border, is very important because Living National Treasure System is sustained top-down ministry and has got the different training schools under that. Wajima has got a Laka training school, and they are continuing this passing on to the people. But this is, again, separate from contemporary art scenes. And there are lots of interesting craft related artists who are working outside that. And there are different factions working also. And then, but they're all institutionalized. For example, 21st Century Museum of Contemporary Art will never exhibit the Living National Treasures artwork. They have got different system and different exhibition systems and different museums, which only exhibit and try to pass this knowledge to other generation. And so the problem about passing, you need to have younger generation interested in, but this Living National Treasure System have got very closed institutions for training. And unfortunately, young people are losing interest in that. And then, so those one who are interested in the contemporary art will never cross with the Living National Treasure System. So these are big problems in here. I observed.
Thank you very much. We had a very, very fruitful session. Thank you, Dr. Kikuchi, for joining us this morning. I look forward to more collaboration and engagement with your good self in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Kikuchi. Thank you, Louis.